Welcome once again, fellow drifters. If you ever find yourself in the ethereal plane, say as a ghost or a spirit, remember to go towards the light, the neon lights, and listen to the voice from the other side. If you enjoy these stories, hit like and subscribe. This happened when I was 14. And to this day, I've never told anyone besides the friend I was with. Not because it's some huge, terrifying thing, but because the more I try to explain it, the less it makes sense. And when something doesn't make sense, it tends to stick with you. There's a small park in my hometown that's tucked way back into the woods. You wouldn't even know it was there unless someone showed you. No parking lot, no lights. Just a barely visible dirt path off an old back road. The rumor when we were kids was that it used to be a scout camp or church rec area or something like that, but nobody really knew. The playground was old, wooden beams, rusted bolts, those thick plastic tunnels with weird static buildup when you crawled through them. I first found it in the 5th grade with my friend Tyler. We'd been exploring the woods and followed the path without knowing where it led. The place gave me a weird feeling even back then, but we played there a few times after that. Then it got forgotten as we grew up and got phones and stopped doing stuff outside. Fast forward to a Friday night in November, freshman year of high school. Tyler texted me late, around 11:30, asking if I wanted to sneak out and hang. Nothing crazy, just walk around, maybe hit the gas station if we felt brave enough. I lived in a quiet neighborhood, so I popped out through my window and met him at the corner. We started walking around like usual, but we were bored. Then Tyler brought up the old playground. Remember that place in the woods? I hadn't thought about it in years, but as soon as he said it, I pictured the red slide, the warped seesaw, and that weird hollow sound the ground made when you jumped on the mulch. It didn't take long before we decided to go. It took about 40 minutes to walk there. It was colder than we expected, and the air had that dead stillness that makes sound carry in weird ways. No traffic, no wind, just the crunch of our feet and the occasional crack of a distant branch. It felt later than it actually was. We finally found the path and followed it in. It hadn't changed much. A clearing opened to reveal the same old playground. Everything was still there, swings hanging crooked, slide tilted where the support beam had sunk a little, with a big wooden structure in the middle with faded red paint. It felt smaller than I remembered, but that could have just been because we were older. We walked around for a while, not saying much. Tyler tried climbing one of the platforms, but stepped through a rotten board and gave up. I sat on the swing, but it barely moved and creaked like hell. I started to feel uncomfortable, but I couldn't pin down why. It wasn't like anything was happening. It just felt wrong. It was too quiet, like the clearing was muffling sound instead of amplifying it. Then we both heard it, a sound like plastic popping. Hard to describe, but if you've ever crawled through one of those big plastic tunnels on a playground and slapped your hand against the inside, it was like that, loud, hollow, and sudden. It came from the play structure. We froze and stared at the tunnel. It was completely dark inside. I got this vivid mental image of someone crouched in there watching us. I told myself it was an animal, or the tunnel settling from the cold. But those answers didn't sit right. Tyler whispered, "Did you hear that?" And I nodded. We stood there for maybe a minute. Nothing else happened. Then Tyler, being braver than me, walked up and smacked the outside of the tunnel with his hand. Silence. He crouched down and looked inside with the flashlight on his phone. "Nothing here," he said. "Just leaves." But when he stood back up, I noticed something strange. One of the swings was moving, not violently, just a gentle back and forth, like someone had pushed it and let go. We hadn't touched it, and there was no wind. I asked if he touched it earlier. He shook his head slowly. We just watched it sway until it eventually stopped. Then we heard the wood creak behind us. It was the structure again, but not like the tunnel pop from earlier. This was a slow, weight-shifting kind of creak, the sound old wood makes when someone steps on it. Tyler swung his light toward the platform, but there was nothing there. We backed up toward the edge of the clearing, and that's when we both noticed something that still makes my skin crawl. There were footprints on the mulch. Not ours. We had barely walked on the play area. These were small, barefoot footprints. Not in a trail, just a pair, right under the tunnel opening, like someone had climbed out. As we left, we didn't run, but we didn't say a single word until we were back on the road. Later, Tyler tried to rationalize it. Said maybe the prints were already there. Maybe it was an animal in the tunnel. Maybe the swing moved because he stepped too hard. I wanted to believe that too, but we never went back, and I haven't even walked that road in years. Here's the weirdest part though. A few months ago, I drove through my hometown while visiting family. I hadn't thought about that night in years. On a whim, I pulled over where the trail used to be. There was no path anymore, like none. It wasn't like it had been overgrown. It was just gone, like it had never been there. But the weirdest thing was the sound I heard when I got out of the car for a second. 2 sharp pops, like plastic coming from the woods. I got back in and left without looking twice. Maybe it was nothing, but I haven't talked to Tyler in years, and for some reason, I don't want to bring it up again. For context, I, 28 male, my friend Greg, 29 male, and his cousin Danny, 25 female, are into urban exploring. Nothing extreme, mostly old barns, houses, and the occasional school or factory. We don't break in or vandalize, just go in, take photos, soak in the weirdness of decaying places, then leave it how we found it. We've done urban exploring for years and have seen plenty of creepy or decayed places, but this one left us with a feeling none of us can explain. What happened inside lasted less than 2 hours, but it still lingers with all 3 of us. We didn't imagine it, we all experienced the same things, and none of us can figure out what it was. This time we went to an abandoned glass bottling plant about 45 minutes outside of Pittsburgh. We'd been eyeing it for a while. It shut down in the early 90s and has been left to rot ever since. Most people don't bother with it because it's out in the woods and fenced off, but someone Greg knew said there were easy entry points and that it was quiet but creepy. We parked about a quarter mile away and hiked in, found a gap in the fence behind what used to be the employee parking lot. The place was huge, like a small industrial complex with multiple buildings. Vines had grown over the main structure, and parts of the roof were caved in. There was graffiti all over, but none of it recent. It felt truly abandoned. Inside, it was the usual stuff. Broken equipment, shattered windows, paperwork still blowing around. We were there maybe 30 minutes before anything weird happened. We were standing in what looked like the main production room. Big open floor, rusted conveyor belts, some office windows high up on one of the walls. When we all heard a metallic bang, like a door slamming, but none of us had touched a door. We froze and listened. Nothing followed. Probably a raccoon, Greg said, trying to sound chill. But Danny and I looked at each other. It didn't sound like an animal. It was sharp, deliberate. But we kept going. Later, we found a staircase at the back of the building that led down to a lower level. Basically a basement or utility area. I had to duck because the ceiling was so low. It was noticeably colder down there. We didn't have a thermometer or anything, but we all mentioned it. The basement was more decayed, lots of water damage, mold on the walls, but what stood out was a locked metal door at the end of a long hallway. It had a chain looped around it and an old rusted padlock. But the weird thing was, the floor in front of the door was clean, like someone had recently swept or moved things. No debris, no dust, just smooth concrete. Greg tried the doorknob. It rattled but didn't open. He joked it was probably the ghost break room. We didn't laugh. A while after that, we were back upstairs, taking pictures near the broken vending machines, when Danny called out from across the room. She had found an old walkie-talkie on the ground, one of those bulky 80s-style models. It was scratched and clearly hadn't worked in decades, except then it crackled, like static, loud enough for all three of us to hear. She dropped it and stepped back. I picked it up. No power source. Battery compartment was corroded shut. I shook it. Nothing. But we all heard it. One clear burst of static, then silence. No voices, just one bzzz and then dead again. We decided to leave soon after that, but not fast enough. We were passing through the production room again when Danny stopped and pointed up at the second floor office windows, the ones overlooking the floor from above. "There was something there," she said quietly. "Just now, I swear." We looked. Nothing, just dusty glass. Greg asked her what she saw, and she said she thought it was a man in the window, tall, standing perfectly still, watching us and then gone. At this point, I was ready to go, but Greg, ever the adventurer, said we should check upstairs, just to rule it out. We argued for a minute, but eventually we followed him. The upstairs offices were more intact. There were desks and old phones, and calendars from 1991 still on the walls. Nothing looked disturbed, but it was uncomfortably quiet, even more than before, like our footsteps didn't echo the way they should. We walked into a large front office, the one with the window Danny saw the figure in, and the air felt wrong. I don't know how to explain it. Heavier somehow. Greg looked out the window. "See?" he said. "Nothing here. Probably just your reflection." But Danny wasn't even near the window when she saw it. Then something happened that I can't explain. From the hallway behind us came a sound like dragging across the floor. Not fast, but slow, heavy, like a large piece of wood or furniture being pulled. Greg thought it was a squirrel or raccoon again. He stepped into the hallway and called out, "Hello?" No answer, no more dragging. But when he turned back to us, his face was pale. The door at the end of the hall, the one we had come through, was shut, and we hadn't shut it. It was one of those industrial doors that drag slightly across the ground when it closes. It was heavy and loud. We would have heard it, but it was now completely shut. We left right then, fast. No one said a word until we got back to the fence. Once we were outside and back near the road, Greg finally asked us, "Did either of you see the guy in the hallway?" Danny and I looked at each other. "What guy?" I asked. He paused and shook his head. "Never mind. We still don't know what that building was used for in its last years. Some people online say they were there. Some people online say there were storage areas below that weren't mapped on blueprints. One guy told me via a DM that it was used for off-record contracts during the Cold War. Whatever that means, I don't know." We went in expecting broken glass and cool old machines. We left with this crawling feeling that something had been down there with us. Still is, probably. None of us have gone back, and that locked door in the basement? I dream about it sometimes. Something happened to me and my girlfriend during a cabin trip last fall that still messes with my head. I'm not saying it was ghosts or anything like that. I honestly don't know what it was, but it wasn't normal, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. We weren't drinking and we weren't high, just two people trying to get away from the city for a few days. What happened out there felt like it belonged in a different world. This happened in October 2023. My girlfriend Mia and I had been looking for a quiet weekend away from city noise. We found this cabin on a rental site, remote, cozy, had decent reviews, and was located somewhere in northern Vermont. The place was about a 30-minute drive from the nearest paved road. We got there around 3 p.m. It was exactly what we wanted. The cabin was rustic but clean, nestled in a clearing surrounded by dense woods. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no neighbors in sight. There was a wood stove, solar power for lights, and a well pump for water. Basically off-grid but livable. The first evening was uneventful. We cooked some pasta, played some board games, lit a fire. I did notice something odd while collecting firewood out back. There was a small pile of rocks, maybe 15 feet from the cabin, stacked into a sort of cone shape, like a little cairn. I didn't think much of it at the time. Figured a previous renter left it or some sort of trail marker. We went to bed around 11, and the silence was intense. I've camped before, but this was different. Not a single cricket, no wind, just dead. I actually had trouble sleeping because of how quiet it was. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard someone walking on the back deck, just 2 or 3 steps. I froze, waited, but didn't hear anything else. I convinced myself it was the wood creaking from the cooling temps. The next morning, I checked the deck. There was frost, but no footprints. That should have reassured me, but it didn't. Something was off. Mia and I went for a short hike after breakfast, just down a dirt trail behind the cabin. About a half a mile in, we found another pile of stacked rocks. This one was taller, maybe waist height, and had something dead next to it. A squirrel, maybe? It looked fresh but untouched, like it had just died. No blood, just lying there. We joked nervously that we'd stumbled into somebody's weird art project and turned back. That night, we cooked again, but the mood was a little heavier. The woods felt like they were pressing in closer. I kept looking out the windows without knowing why. At one point, while washing up, Mia called me over to the front window. "Do you see that?" she asked, pointing out into the tree line. It took me a second, but yeah, there was something standing just beyond the edge of the clearing. Tall, unmoving, looked like a person. I ran outside with a flashlight, not my smartest move. But when I got the light on the spot, there was nothing there. No person, no animal. But the feeling of being watched stayed with me the whole night. We locked the doors and didn't open a single window. We had planned to leave late the next morning, but woke up around 6 a.m. to the sound of knocking. Not on the door, but on the walls. Like someone was walking around the cabin, tapping every side with a stick. 3 knocks, then silence. Move to the next wall. 3 knocks. Repeat. It made a full circle, then stopped. We didn't move. We didn't speak. We just laid in bed holding our breath. After maybe 10 minutes of silence, I got up and looked out the back window. The cairn I'd seen on day 1? It was gone. Just an empty patch of dirt where it had been. We packed up in record time. Didn't even eat breakfast. While loading the car, I noticed something etched into the dirt where the cairn had been. A circle, crudely drawn, with what looked like stick figures holding hands around the edge. As we were driving down the gravel road, Mia gasped and grabbed my arm. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw it too. A figure, pale and motionless, standing right where the tree line began, just watching us go. It was wearing something white or light gray, almost blending with the trees behind it. I blinked and it was gone. We drove back to town in silence. Cell signal kicked in after about 20 minutes, and I immediately checked for local stories, legends, anything. I found nothing concrete. A couple of vague mentions of forest watchers and local folklore, but no real info. Here's the kicker though. When I tried to leave a review for the cabin, the listing was gone. Not just unavailable, but deleted. I even emailed the host, but I've not heard back yet. So yeah, I don't know what we stumbled into. Maybe it was an elaborate prank by locals. Maybe it was wildlife and paranoia. But we both saw and heard the same things. We've never talked about going back, and I still think about the knocking, the way it moved from wall to wall like it was mapping us. And now, sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I swear I hear those same 3 knocks, just faintly, like they followed us home. It's probably just my imagination though. If anyone's heard of anything similar in New England, I'd love to know I'm not alone in this. This happened back in January, and I've sat on it for a while because I still can't quite explain what happened. I'm not trying to make it sound more dramatic than it was. It was just strange. One of those things that sits in your mind differently the longer you think about it. The place was an abandoned school in rural Ohio. 2 stories, brick, completely shut down in the early 2000s when the town merged with another school district. No fire, no scandal, just not enough students anymore. Since then, the place had been left to rot. Windows broken out, front doors chained, the whole thing half swallowed by trees and weeds. My buddy Tyler and I are into urban exploring, and this was the next spot on our list. He had checked it out a week earlier and found a broken window at the basement level that was easy to crawl through. So we drove out there one Saturday afternoon. It was cold and gray, the kind of day that makes everything feel a little more drained and lifeless than it probably is. We got in through the window without a problem. The basement was what you'd expect, dark, cluttered, and stale. Old desks, rusted filing cabinets, insulation hanging like cobwebs. The smell hit hard. Mildew, wet concrete, and something else I couldn't quite place, like paper that's been damp for too long. The first floor was in better shape. You could still make out classroom numbers and faded bulletin boards. Lockers lined both sides of the hall. Most were rusted, some hanging open. But Tyler pointed out something weird. Every locker on the left side was just barely open, an inch or two, while every locker on the right was fully shut. It felt off, but not alarming. We pushed one of the left side lockers shut just out of curiosity, walked away. A few seconds later, we heard it click open again. Slowly, not like it was forced, just eased itself open. We checked it, nothing inside. Tried another, same thing. We figured maybe the floor was uneven or the doors were warped, but it still left this weird feeling neither of us could shake. We made our way up to the second floor and wandered into a math classroom. The desks were still in rows and the whiteboard stained with faded equations. What got me, though, was the smell in there. It wasn't moldy. It smelled like chalk dust and pencil shavings, like a real classroom, like people had only just left. I remember saying that out loud. It smells too normal in here, and Tyler nodded but didn't say anything. That's when we heard footsteps in the hallway. Just 2 or 3 steps, slow and measured. Definitely not an animal, and definitely not one of us. We both froze. Tyler moved to the door and peered through the little rectangle of glass. It was an empty hallway. We waited, and nothing else happened. We stepped out together, slowly, and listened again. Then, the school bell rang. 2 sharp dings, like the old-fashioned kind you used to hear between periods. Not electronic, but mechanical. It didn't echo. It didn't sound distant. It sounded active, like it was working, even though we knew this place hadn't had power in over a decade. We just looked at each other, not scared, exactly, but locked into that mutual, "Did you hear that too?" kind of silence. Tyler tried to play it off. Could have been metal shifting or something. But he didn't believe it any more than I did. Even so, we went up to the 3rd floor. That level was rough, water-damaged walls, parts of the ceiling sagging or collapsed. This was where the admin offices were. Doors labeled principal, counselor, and records. Most were open or hanging crooked on rusted hinges, but one door at the end of the hall, right near the auditorium entrance, was completely shut. No peeling paint, no signs of water damage, just clean and quiet, like someone had closed it yesterday. The air felt heavier up there, like gravity was slightly wrong. I had this pressure behind my eyes, and Tyler looked visibly uncomfortable too. He walked towards the door, stopped with his hand just hovering over the knob, then shook his head and stepped back. "I'm good," he said. "Let's go." We didn't argue about it. We made our way back downstairs. As we walked past the same row of lockers on the 1st floor, the ones we had seen cracked open before, I noticed they were all closed now. Not just partially shut, but sealed tight. Every single one of them. Tyler noticed too. We didn't say anything. We just picked up the pace, crawled back out the basement window, and got the hell out of there. We drove for a while before either of us spoke. Then Tyler asked, "Did you see the chalkboard before we left that math room?" I told him I hadn't. He said, just as we were stepping out, he looked back. In the lower corner of the whiteboard, there was a line of fresh chalk that hadn't been there before. Written in all caps, it said, "Attendance 2 out of 2. We haven't been back, haven't really talked about it either. But a few weeks ago, I drove past the building again on the way to visit my cousin. It had been sealed up tighter, fresh boards on the doors, and a new fence out front. Someone had spray painted 'Keep Out' in red across the entrance." My partner and I bought a 120-year-old farmhouse a few months ago, with plans to renovate it slowly while living in it. It's in a rural part of New York, quiet, cheap, and surrounded by woods and fields. We'd been looking for something with character, and this place checked every box. Wide plank floors, hand-carved staircase, original windows, even the old barn still standing out back. We knew it would be a project. What we didn't expect was the strange stuff that started happening almost immediately. The first thing was the front door. It's an old oak door with a heavy iron latch instead of a knob. We lock it every night. That first week, we'd come downstairs in the morning and find the latch undone and the door cracked an inch or two. Not wide open, just enough to notice. We thought maybe the wood was warped or we weren't closing it properly. But even after I adjusted the hinges and added a bolt at the top, it kept happening. Then it stopped for a couple of weeks, so we chalked it up to house-settling weirdness. Around the third week, my partner, I'll call her Erin, told me she kept waking up at 2 and 3 a.m., feeling like something had changed in the room. That was the word she used, changed. Not that she heard something or felt watched. Just that she would get chills down her spine like when she would run up the stairs from a dark basement as a kid. I hadn't noticed anything at that point, but I started waking up randomly too. No sounds, no obvious reason, just fully awake, wide-eyed in the dark. One night, I stayed awake after one of these wake-ups and sat in the living room reading. Around 3:20 in the morning, I heard something creak in the hallway, floorboards shifting like footsteps. The strange part was the rhythm. 2 slow steps, pause, then one more, then silence. We don't have pets. Erin was asleep upstairs. I didn't see anything when I checked, and nothing else happened that night. Over time, it became a pattern. Odd things, small but consistent. We'd both hear floorboards creak upstairs when we were in the kitchen. Closet doors would be cracked open that we swore we had closed. Light bulbs would burn out in pairs, never just one, always 2, usually in rooms we weren't in. Then there was the barn. We hadn't started renovating it yet. It's full of old farm equipment and tools. A couple of broken chairs and what looks like a homemade coop or cage made from chicken wire and pallets. One afternoon, we walked out there just to poke around. Erin found what looked like small bones in the coop, too big to be mice. She thought maybe raccoon or a possum, but something about the way they were arranged creeped her out, like they'd been gathered in a little pile, almost deliberately. A few nights after that, we heard the barn door slam shut. It had been propped open with a cinder block. There was no wind that night. I went out with a flashlight and found the block about 5 feet from the door, just lying there like someone had tossed it. Still, we kept telling ourselves it was an old house, old property. Stuff moves, things fall, animals get in. That was our mantra. But some things don't feel like settling wood or squirrels in the attic. Like the phone charger. I left mine plugged in by the bed, and in the morning it was gone. Not just unplugged, but completely gone. We tore the room apart looking for it. Nothing. A week later, I found it in the attic, coiled neatly on top of a covered mirror we hadn't uncovered yet. We hadn't even opened the attic since we moved in. And then there was the writing. There's a small crawl space in the basement, dirt floor, stacked stone walls, barely tall enough to kneel in. We went down there last month to check the old foundation. On the far wall, in faded chalk or paint, someone had written, "Time changes shape." Erin thought it might be left over from a previous tenant, but who writes something like that in a crawl space? It didn't look recent, and there was nothing else down there but broken jars and an old workbench with rusted nails in it. Lately, there's been a new pattern. Little taps on the windows at night. Not banging or scratching, just tapping. Light and irregular. Always after midnight. We are surrounded by trees, but they're not close enough to hit the glass. And there's no wind most nights. I tried setting up a motion camera in the living room facing the big front window. It only ever catches static for a few seconds around 2:46 in the morning. Every time, nothing else, just brief glitchy static bursts, then nothing. We haven't told our families because they'll either tell us we're overworked or we're letting the house get to us. And maybe they're right. Maybe renovating a 120-year-old home messes with your head. But here's the thing that finally made me sit down and write this out. Last night, I found something in the kitchen drawer that neither of us put there. It was a Polaroid photo, faded and slightly curled. It showed the front of the house, clearly decades ago. The paint was peeling in the exact same pattern as the photo we took on move-in day. But what got me was the figure in the window. Upper floor, far left. Just a silhouette, but it was holding something up against the glass. A Polaroid camera. I'm not looking for answers. I just needed to put this somewhere. We're still here, still renovating, still telling ourselves it's just an old house doing old house things. But some nights, when the tapping starts, I stay very still and listen. And sometimes I swear I can hear someone walking around upstairs, even when we're both in the living room. This happened a few years ago when I worked nights at a retirement home as a part-time caregiver. It wasn't a medical facility, more like assisted living. Most of the residents were older but still pretty sharp. A few had dementia, but nothing extreme. I worked the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, mostly just doing bed checks, answering the occasional call light, and sitting at the front desk trying not to sleep. The place itself was calm, too calm, honestly. It had that weird sterile stillness at night, like everything was on pause. No music, no TVs, just the faint hum of the vents and the buzz from the hallway lights. The first strange thing I noticed was how residents talked about the boy. It started with Mrs. Harper. She had arthritis but was completely lucid. One night I brought her some water and she asked if the little boy could have one too. I thought she was joking, so I said, "Sure, I'll get him one too." She just smiled and said, "He doesn't drink much, just watches." A few days later, Mr. Levine, who never spoke to anyone, stopped me during my rounds and said, "You shouldn't let that child wander. It upsets the others." I asked what child he meant, and he just waved it off and closed his door. Over the next couple weeks, more of the residents started referencing a boy. Always at night, always vague. "Tell him not to come in my room anymore. He keeps knocking but never comes in. He's not wearing shoes." They all described him the same way. Small, dark hair, maybe 6 or 7 years old. But there were no kids at the facility, no visiting family at night, and no staff with children. One night I was doing paperwork at the desk around 2 a.m. when the front door chime went off, like someone had come in. That shouldn't have been possible unless I had a key or someone buzzed them in. I checked the cameras. Nothing. The feed was frozen for about 13 seconds, then came back. That's when I heard the soft pat, pat, pat of bare feet on tile. It was distant, down the north wing hallway. I thought maybe someone had gotten up and was walking around barefoot, which happens sometimes. But when I checked, all the room doors were closed and the motion lights hadn't triggered. Back at the desk, I saw a small wet footprint on the floor. Just one, near the lobby entrance. The weather outside was dry. I cleaned it up and didn't tell anyone. A few nights later, I passed Mrs. Harper's room and found her wide awake, sitting up in bed, staring at the corner. I asked if she was okay. She said, "He doesn't know he's dead, does he?" I asked who. She said, "The boy. He keeps asking where his mother is." I didn't know what to say. I just brought her some tea and sat with her for a bit. When I stood up to leave, she grabbed my hand and whispered, "Don't answer if he knocks." After that, I started bringing headphones to work. Music helped me ignore the weird creaks and random noises. The building was old, pipes groaned and walls settled, all logical stuff. I didn't want to feed the vibe. But then the knocking started, always faint, always at the very bottom of the resident doors, like too low to be someone standing. Tap, tap, tap. One of the other nurses said she heard it too, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always just once or twice. She joked that it was the barefoot ghost kid, and we laughed, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. One night, I was alone during a storm. The power flickered, then came back. I went to check the halls, just in case an emergency light had gone out. At the end of the hallway, near the fire exit, there's a locked supply closet. No one ever uses it. As I walked past, I heard what I swear was a child laughing behind the door, short and quick, like they were trying not to be heard. I didn't open it. I don't even know why. I just got this cold feeling in my stomach and turned around and left the hall entirely. Maintenance checked it the next day. Nothing inside but mop buckets and old linens. That was a while ago, and I don't even work there anymore. But last week I stopped by to visit one of the nurses who still works there. We got to talking and I asked her, half jokingly, if the boy ever made a return. She got real quiet and said Mrs. Harper passed away a few months ago, and during her last days, she kept saying, "He's getting closer now. He's inside the walls." No one knew what she meant. They also found small wet footprints outside her door the morning she died. I don't know what to make of any of it. I've worked at other places since, and nothing like that has happened again. It was probably just the isolation, the night shift, the way older buildings creak and play tricks on you.